My name is Jim Lawrence. I'm the director of the Mid-Michigan Library League. And along with the Traverse Area District Library, we're sponsoring tonight's event. This is the second such workshop we've held, targeting directors, trustees, and friends groups. And we are fortunate to have with us tonight Ann Cernak, attorney with Foster, Swift, Collins, and Smith. Ann has presented many times at the Michigan Library Association conferences and other conferences, and has helped many libraries around the state with policy and legal issues over the past several years. So I will turn it over to Ann, and we will begin with Millages.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come up here and talk to you about these two topics today. We're covering sort of different topics, one on millages and one on Open Meetings Act. The reason I think in part these two topics were chosen is that library directors and staff are faced with issues like this every day, but it's important for the trustees also to be aware of these two big topics because they're going to affect the long-term financing of your library. They're also going to affect, and the Open Meetings Act affects the way you do business at your library building. So I think there will be of particular interest to the trustee. We're going to cover a couple different topics. One is we're going to start out talking about the authority of the library. And I took a look, and there's a lot of different kinds of libraries here, so I'm going to touch on that briefly. If you've got questions about your particular type of library, that's one of those types of questions that I'm certainly happy to stick around after the presentation and discuss with you. And then we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of what the millage language has to look like and why your lawyer is going to press you to ask for all this information because there's a lot of specific statutory requirements with the millage language. And then the final part of that presentation is going to get into a little bit about the campaigning and sort of the do's and don'ts as the library. Some of you who are there Friends Group members here? This might be of particular interest to the members of the Friends Group because often Friends Groups are instrumental or become instrumental when they talk about the millage campaign issues. So what authority does a library have to request or levy a millage? When you talk about libraries are public entities. And libraries and other public entities are a little bit different. In a lot of situations, the laws are there, and if there's no law in the book, usually you can do it. It's not breaking any law. Libraries and public entities are a little bit different. You actually have to look to see whether there's specific authority to do what you want to do, and whether there's any limits to that authority. So for district libraries probably have the best group of laws on the books. District library, the most recent recreation of the District Library Establishment Act was in 1989, which is 25 years ago now. But that's actually a very modern library law compared to county libraries and township and city libraries, which are pretty antiquated laws. But for district libraries, this is the provision right out of the statute. All or part of the money necessary for the establishment and operation of a district library may be supplied by a tax levied by the district library on the taxable value of the property. I'm talking to you today about the district library millage because there's other ways to finance a district library. You can finance it through general fund contributions of the participating municipalities, for example. Each participating municipality can have a millage tribute towards the district library funding. But this is the one I want to focus on because as library board members, this is the tax that you would have authority to pass. A couple interesting aspects of this. One is that you can actually have up to 2 mills in perpetuity, meaning that for the first 2 mills, it doesn't have to have an expiration date, which is kind of unusual for municipalities. Most municipalities are limited by 20 years. Anything above those 2 mills must be levied for not more than 20 mills. But you also have a 4 mill limit, which is a lot for libraries, so that's another advantage to district libraries. It is a district-wide millage, and I want you to keep this in mind when you're talking about planning for a municipal election, because we're going to touch on a couple different points about this later. but you have to be levying the same millage district-wide. This is a pretty easy concept when you talk about a district library that is newly created, or a district library that's been formed that doesn't have a millage yet. You know, you have it levied uniformly. Where this arises a lot and becomes kind of an important part to think about is when you have a district library that is thinking of adding a participating municipality. In those cases, one of the conditions of adding a new party to a district library is that that new party has to levy the existing millage in place. So you want to be careful, because we've seen circumstances where it's confusing and some people think that the new party can come in at a lower level and the rest of the district will be at a higher level. It does have to be levied uniformly throughout the district. So keep that in mind when you're doing your planning for a district library, especially if you're planning on adding people after a millage is already in effect. One of the benefits also of being a district library is that you are in full control over the millage, meaning that you as a district library board get to determine the amount of the millage, when you're going to levy the millage, how much will be levied. That's really in control of the library board. You don't have to ask permission from another party, for example, to get the millage money in effect. And then once the district library makes that determination, then the only people you have to seek approval from are the voters. So district libraries have autonomy in a number of areas, but particularly with millages, it's another, I guess, if you're talking about pros and cons of becoming a district library. I mentioned the authority. PA 164 libraries this is an 1877 statute. And for those of you who are PA 164 libraries or have been PA 164 libraries, I know you're fully aware of the struggles that you have in trying to manage an operation under those laws. One of the benefits that you have with being a PA 164 library is that you do have the ability to form a library and seek a millage proposal from the voters on a petition of 50 people from the library, or 50 people signing the petition. Why this becomes important is sometimes there's friction between the library and the municipality, the city or the township, for example. And the city or the township is reluctant to help you as a library become an independent library board. And this benefit of this is it really takes that decision out of the township's, city, or village's hands, because once they're presented with this petition, assuming the petition is validly drafted and the signatures are good, they have to put that ballot proposal on the ballot. The statute says it shall be placed on the ballot. So again, it's giving a little bit more power of the people here in forming a library. Tax may be for an unlimited duration or specifying number of years. Again, there's an ability here that not a lot of other municipalities have for these perpetual millages. I want to stop and talk about perpetual millages as we talk about the time frame of them, because some of you may have them and start to realize at some point the Headley Amendment affects the millage and it goes down and you start having to ask for more money on top of that. So it's not the end-all be-all to have a perpetual millage. It has a consistent level of funding, but sometimes that funding becomes insufficient. Again, can't be more than 2 mills right now for a township library. You're capped by that 2 mill levy. For some municipalities, that's a real struggle, because 2 mills in some communities does not raise a lot of money. So they're really, butting their heads up against a ceiling here. For others, 2 mills may raise $1 million. So it really depends on the type of community. Once the ballot proposal goes on, this is a little bit where townships and township libraries, cities and city libraries have some friction, because the authority really is with the library board to ask for the millage, except the money is kept at the city or at the township treasury. So that can create some issues. So if you are thinking of creating a PA 164 library and thinking of going for a millage, because you cannot create a library under PA 164 without going for a millage at the same time. It goes hand in hand under this section of of PA 164. If you're thinking about doing that, I'd get some straight facts on what that means to you as far as your relationship then with the city, village, township that you happen to be situated in. The good news about PA 164 libraries is that once you get this millage in place, this is under section 10, and this is or 10A, depending on if you're a city or a township. This is the voter-initiated millage. After that, each year, the library board gets to decide how much within that voter authorization you'll levy. So again, it's a little bit more autonomy, you'll see. Section 1, city libraries, this is something that is very unique to library law. And there's a lot of reasons that I don't have time to go into now why this is the way it is, but a city may levy up to 1 mil without a vote of the public to a city library. If you want to go for the extra mil, that extra mil has to be voted. The problem with this, from a library perspective, it's great. You have funding, you don't have to ask for voters, you don't have to go through that voted millage process. The downside to this is that it's the city council decides on a year-by-year basis how much to fund you within that 1 mil. Again, it puts the library in a little bit of position where you may not have that surety or that consistent funding from year to year. They might decide to cut taxes by lowering the library's budget, for example, and they would be that would be something that would be within the statutory bounds. So keep that in mind when you're deciding if you're deciding whether to form a city library or if you're involved with a city library. County libraries, they also have an older statute. County libraries have the ability to levy taxes or to have a voted millage to support library service. You see this a lot where you have one county that may have a countywide millage to support all the libraries within this county. So there's a couple different ways counties can be involved on a countywide basis. One of the big questions that we get is how much, and I think libraries have done just a fabulous job in the last 10 years or so that I've been working with them getting this information out. I don't have see many libraries that have a lot of questions about this, except that your voters are starting to be very savvy now. So you have to ask they're going to ask you a lot of questions. Why do you need this millage? Why do you need an increase in millage? You're going to have to be able to explain to them about your other revenue sources and why they may not be sufficient anymore when they've been sufficient over the last 10 years, for example. Obviously things like the housing market, things that affect property tax values are going to be very clear to them, but they might not understand that penal fines. A lot of libraries used to be totally on penal fines. Most can't survive anymore just on penal fines. That's something that you're going to have to explain. Gifts and endowments. I mean, you may have a large endowment that the public knows about that they're going to wonder why you're not dipping into the endowment fund. It may be that you can't. It may be tied as to principle or tied as to purpose. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to have to consider when setting your millage amount, but also it's an important thing to keep in mind when you get into the campaign aspect of your millage, because these are the questions that the voters are going to ask you. How much savings do you have? Are you going to be dipping into your savings account? Those types of things to keep in mind when you're setting how much. Because one of the things that we have seen, and I think on an anecdotal basis, I'm very happy to say that over this last years, election cycles, most of the library millages that have passed. And some of them that haven't passed, anecdotally, things that, like, for example, they're going for a new building and the public didn't feel like they needed a new building. But other times, people just felt like they were asking too much money. And so that's one of those things that, again, is going to be something for the board. As the board, you're going to have to consider that when you're setting the amount. For the Friends group, that's something that if you're assisting in any way with a campaign, the Friends board should be very educated as to why the amount of money is necessary, what's the purpose of the millage, and these kind of things, because you're going to be asked these questions by the public, and you're going to have good answers, or they're going to feel like you're just asking for too much. My one thing I like to tell groups is don't rely on your past ballot language. I have seen a lot of libraries that want to just take their past millage ballot and they put in new numbers and think it's going to be okay. especially for some libraries that haven't done millages in 20 years, those may not be acceptable anymore. There was a law, PA 248, so it's been 14 years now. But this is a law that changed sort of the landscape of ballot languages. It is why when you look at the ballot, you look at your election today, it's very difficult. It's not very user-friendly. I understand that from the perspective. I understand that from trying to explain to clients, explain to the public why it has to be that way. But I want to explain to you why the ballot language is the way it is and why your lawyer's going to be asking you the questions that they're asking you. And again, turning to the Friends groups here, it's going to be important for you to take a look at that ballot proposal and understand exactly why the information is on the ballot, why it has to be on the ballot, and what it means to the voter in order to assist the library with the educational aspect of a millage campaign. The first thing is obviously the millage rate to be authorized. And a millage is 1/10 of a cent, so it's $1 per $1,000 of taxable value. I am no mathematician. I have to sit down with my calculator every time you do this. Sometimes what's good to do, again, focusing on knowing the amount of money you're asking for, but also the educational aspect, is putting some figures together for the public. If your house has a taxable value of $50,000, it will mean this much to you. If your house has a taxable value of $100,000, it will mean this much to you. Because I think this is one of those things that you have to put, you'll say $1 per $1,000 of taxable value. What does that mean in dollars and cents to your taxpayers, to your residents? This is the technical part of the language that's in the Act. The other thing is the educational part. Make sure the written description matches the numbers. This is, again, where using the old ballot language will get you in trouble, because you'll make some changes into one part of it, and then you won't make changes in the other part of it. So really be careful with that. And we often use language that says, shall the district library levy an amount not to exceed this amount. I think there's an implication that you don't have to levy the full amount that you're authorized to, and there's very few communities out there that can afford not to levy the full amount. Typically, you're very conservative and cautious as to what you're asking for, so there's no reason really to dip down below. But in the event that for example, let's just say you went for a millage of 1 year, you levied, it's a 10-year millage, you've levied 1 mill, your property taxes shoot up. It's just the economy goes, gangbusters. You guys are, doing well. All of a sudden, it's bringing in a lot more money than you thought it would. You thought there'd be a, further decline. You may, in year 4, only want to levy 0.8 mils. Now, I suspect you're not going to get many people that would challenge you if you were to do that, but again, in the amount not to exceed clearly gives you the authority to levy up to the authorized maximum maximum amount. The estimated amount of revenue that's collected in the first year that's the millage is authorized and levy. It should be in the terms of taxable value. We're all about taxable value now. In years before, it was SEV. Now we're talking about taxable value. Those are the numbers you should be looking at. This is something that if you've got a new district especially, and if you've got, you cover a large territory, make sure that you've got good numbers from the county or the townships or the cities, wherever you're working with, to make sure you've got the accurate taxable value for your district. It is an estimate. And a lot of municipalities have been very cautious lately. They don't wait until their millage is expired in order to ask for a new millage. So keep that in mind. If your taxable value in 2014 is, X dollars, and it will raise $200,000, make sure that you think about, if your first year of levy is not going to be till 2015, what do you estimate that will generate in 2015? So if you've kind of taken a historical look at your particular district or township or city, and you see that over the past 5 years it's gone up by about 2%, an estimate would be to take the 2014 number, increase it by 2%, and that would be an estimate. So again, it's just an estimate. You don't have to get down. I have a lot of, I'll get the information back, and the clients will tell me that it will raise $542,650.63. I mean, you don't have to get that specific. I wouldn't get that specific on the ballot language, but I think that's the nature of libraries. You like to have all that good information there and be very specific. So it's a good thing, but again, on your ballot language, it can be a little bit more general. I want to pause here and say, I'm not trying to make an advertisement for lawyers, but this is one of those areas where I would encourage you, even if you write out language yourself, to have a lawyer look at it. Because there's some things that they might have, there's some things that they might suggest differently, and at least you'll get the, I guess, the comfort of having someone take a look at it. So that's one of those things that I would certainly recommend. And this is one of those things that we often talk about with clients, is how much, what's a reasonable estimate, and how did you get to that number? We talk through that and come to a comfortable estimate in the end. The duration of the millage in years. Be careful with this number, because it looks funny on paper. You know, a 20-year millage is 2014, for example, to 2033. Sometimes I see 2014 to 2034, because you add 20, but you don't take into account that, you know, of the way that that's levied. So again, this is one of those things to really to double check. So again, make sure too that you are within your, you know, we talked about authority. Make sure you're in your authority. Because we've done millages where you want to make sure that if you're limited by 2 mills, you're not asking it 2.5 mills. If you're limited by 20 years, you're not asking it for 25 years, because then it questions the validity of the proposal. Also, and I want to pause here to talk a little bit about making sure that if you're a city, you work with the city or the township to make sure that you're not asking for something that would exceed the total amount of taxes that they're authorized to levy, because your tax typically is outside that maximum, but you want to make sure you work with your communities to make sure you're not, you know, hitting any sort of ceiling on that aspect of it. If you have an old expiring millage, make sure you show your attorney the old ballot language, because oftentimes if it's been for a number of years, you have to think about what year you're going to levy the first millage. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. The library's last levy of a previously authorized millage will occur in December 2014. They decide to hold an election in 2014 to vote on a 10-year millage. The language must indicate that the initial levy will occur in 2015 and the last year will be 2024. Be very careful of this, because you don't want to cut yourself short by duplicating a year. You don't want to, if you don't realize your old ballot didn't expire, and we have situations where the ballot language is so old, everyone just assumed that you couldn't levy it this year. It turns out from the old ballot language, yes, you can still levy it in 2014. You don't want to ask for your new ballot to start in 2014, because then you've got some other issues going on, but you want to make sure you're not overlapping and that you've got those numbers straight. One thing to know is that, you know, you have that L4029 that's due by September 30th. There is a law that allows libraries to add those levies if they're in December or November of that year to that initial tax. So one thing I always talk about, I have my opinion. I read the statute. I can tell you when you're going to levy the tax, when it's going to be levied. Make sure you run all this by the people that actually put the tax on the tax. If there's a disagreement or there's concern, let's talk about it before you authorize the millage. I don't want there to be a concern the day after the election in November about whether you can put it on the December 1 tax levy. So make sure that when you decide what year you want to levy it, talk to the people that levy the taxes, talk to the county, you know, equalization department, or whoever you need to talk to make sure that it's something that can actually get on the tax bill for the year that you intend it to. If it's a couple years out, it's typically not a problem, but if it's for this year, just a call to verify that you understand and that you both are on the same page with respect to that is a good insurance policy for you. The other thing too about the year of the initial, I've seen this in a couple circumstances, and it happens with district libraries, for example, that are of cities and townships, especially with the way it's gone to move to summer taxes. Some cities can only levy in the summer, for example, and townships can levy, you typically levy in December. Going back to the principle we talked about is that you have to levy the same rate uniformly every year. You could not have a situation where you levied the township tax in December 2014 and then waited to levy the city's tax has to be in the same calendar year. So be very careful about that if you have a couple different types of municipalities. Again, make sure your city people can put it on the tax roll in December of 2014. Make sure the township people can put it on the December 2014 tax roll. Make sure that everybody's on the same page of what's going to happen if the millage passes, for example, in November. You have to have a clear statement of the purpose for the millage. This is something that I think municipalities generally have become more attuned to lately. And it usually comes up, sometimes unfortunately it comes up when you realize that your old ballot language limits you to what you are able to spend the money on. There is old Attorney General precedent that says that you can only use the money for what's listed on the ballot proposal. And you know, for municipalities like cities and townships, I mean, I think it's kind of common sense that you couldn't use road money, for example, to do a new senior center, you know, if it was especially extra voted millage. With libraries, it gets a little more complicated because you want to make sure that your ballot proposal is all-encompassing, okay? So if that's the way you want it, we're going to get into that a little bit later. But typically for district libraries, we say something like, for all district library purposes authorized by law. The other thing you want to be careful of if you're a township and you're thinking of becoming a district, one of the things that's very interesting is that you can continue to levy a millage in support of the new district for that authorization period, but you want to make sure you're not precluded by your old ballot language. So if your old ballot language says you can only use it for township library purposes, or this township library, you want to make sure it's a little broader than that, that says you can use it for, you know, library purposes, so that if you become part of a district and want to take that millage with you, that you are, there's no question about whether that can happen or not. And I'm giving you some examples here. For example, the library wants to use the money for a new building. And the language, we want to use the money to operate a new building, but our ballot language only provides the money for construction of a new building. Can we use the money for the operation of the library? Well, that use could be subject to challenge, because if you said construction, or there's a question about whether that would include the operations. So sometimes our ballot language would, and you give in the third bullet point gives you kind of a fix for the problem. Constructing, equipping, and operating the branch. There may be a reason why you would want it differently, but again, if your purpose is to be as broad, and that typically is the purpose, you want to make sure that your ballot language encompasses everything you want to do with that money, especially if it's a long-term millage, a millage in perpetuity, a millage for 20 years. You want to make sure that it's expansive. Again, if it's for operations, my typical recommendation is that, and a lot of the old ballot language, and again, I'm going to have a caution, you know, that for operating the library. Well, I think if challenged, you know, you could certainly make the argument that operations includes new construction and all this, but why put yourself in that position? Why question, you know, make it an issue of semantics about whether operation would include capital improvements? Make sure the ballot language has that information in there. Again, example of another problem, the voters approved a millage for 10 years to operate the John Doe branch of the Newtown District Library. Now you're considering closing the branch. Again, you were very specific, and sometimes you want to be specific, and this happens a lot in building issues or for short-term millages. Sometimes libraries are specifically limiting the purpose of that millage for that purpose. But again, it's one of those things I want you to be very conscious about and make it very deliberate about, and not just fall into kind of oh, we didn't really realize that, you know, we were limiting ourselves. We wanted to use the money for all branches, but you know, we put John Doe branch in there because we thought that, you know, that might make it a little bit easier for people to understand. But so again, make sure that the purpose of your millage and the way you want to spend your millage matches the actual ballot language. Again, another common problem, we've had this a little bit where there's a recent request for a millage and you realize it's just not enough. Again, it goes back to kind of compounding upon some of the subjects we talked about. Make sure that you are very specific about how much you ask for. But again, if the money's not going to be enough and we have to reduce hours, can we ask for additional millage to increase those hours? Again, you can do that. You can limit the type of millage, but make sure that, and that money has to go into a special account to make sure that you're not commingling it with other money. You have to make sure that that money is only spent for the specific limited purpose of your ballot proposal. This is one that I think is becoming a little bit more commonplace to see this issue on the ballot. Before, we used to be, I mean, almost like knocking our heads against the wall trying to deal with this issue because communities around the states were all doing it a little bit different. And we were talking to our clients about this issue. But I think a lot of the municipalities have been coming around to everybody seems to be on the same page now about this issue based on a relatively recent Attorney General opinion which really clarified it. But basically your millage has to say, and you have to say renewal or you have to say new additional millage. You can't just say increase or other words like that. These two concepts, one or the other, has to be in the ballot proposal. To be a true renewal, it has to be the rate of the millage that was last levied. Okay, and we give you an example. If voters authorized a 1 mil years ago, but it's been reduced to 0.87, the renewal can only be a renewal of 0.87. This is the concept that I think was one of those, I would say 10 years ago, was very difficult, because this was the opinion that we had, but there were lots of communities across the state that would just say, we want a renewal of 1 mil. And then we'd have people say, well, the next town down did this, and they called that a renewal. It's one of those questions that's hard to answer from a client perspective, but the law is very clear, I think, that it's the amount of money last levied. And if you wanted to go back, there was nothing that would prevent you from going back to that 1 mil. But you have to call the 0.87 a renewal and the 0.13 new additional millage. That's is everyone familiar with the kind of Headley override concept? That's what a Headley override is it's getting you back up to your initial level, but that 0.13 is considered new millage. And typically with a new millage, there's no place to really indicate that you have, let's just say you have a 1 mil in perpetuity that's down to 0.8 now and you want to ask for additional 0.5 mils. You don't have to reference in that new millage for the 0.5 mils, hey, by the way, we already have a perpetual millage of 0.8. That's not something that's required of you. But that new millage would be called a new millage. This is the part, too, that I think still causes a lot of controversy and still causes a lot of angst on part of libraries, and that's with the disclosure on the ballot proposal. One of the things that new legislation did in 1999 was require communities to disclose any other entity into which the money will be dispersed, okay? And it's any other local unit of government. A local unit of government means county, village, city, township, school district, intermediate school district, public library, or local authority created under state law. So this is the section that now requires you, if you've had it in your own ballot language or you've seen it in another, that requires you to disclose that part of your money is going to be captured by the DDA, an LDFA, CIA, all the alphabet soup entities that capture your millage. I think this is particularly frustrating for libraries because oftentimes, especially libraries that are created after the DDA, there's no ability to opt out. You are in the DDA. You have no ability to opt out of the DDA. And so you're kind of stuck with it. And not only that, and not only are you losing your money to the DDA, you are now tell voters that. And this is one of those things that voters have a lot of questions about. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about that. It was intended to ensure voters know that the certain entities may capture the millage. And I think it does a particular disservice, I think, to entities that are regional entities. Because, for example, if you're a city and you establish your own DDA, and that money, that now your road money and all money is going into that DDA fund, that's sort of at your own doing. You've created a situation in which that's going to happen. Entities like district libraries don't have that ability. And often district libraries, one of the issues that we face and what I think is going to be important for the Friends group in the audience to understand about is that voter education on this issue in particular is very, very important, especially if you have a large district or a district that encompasses more than one large municipality. Because, for example, we have a situation where you have a city and a township that create a DDA, or create a district library. The city has a DDA. The issue comes up, they see the notice on the ballot proposal, part of the library's money is going to the city's DDA. The question is, I don't want my money going to their DDA. This is one of those things that you really should work with if you're a Friends group, you should work with the library. If you're on the library board, you should be educated yourself to explain this, because really, the money's only captured within a small district. It's not captured district-wide to fund the DDA. Often it's very small amounts. So it's one of those things that may be more concern and more, much ado about nothing. But again, it's one of those things that raises a red flag with voters, especially if the DDA is not very popular, or the CIA or whatever. I wanted to get into a couple things about that if you're on the library board. One of the things that we kind of struggle with, what can you do in this situation? One of the things, and you have to look at the enabling statute, but with DDAs in particular, the DDA and the library can come to an agreement where the DDA doesn't capture those taxes. 5 years ago, this was sort of a dream. We can ask them, but they always said no. We've had many circumstances over the last 5 years, I'd say, where the DDA has agreed not to capture taxes for the duration of the millage. In those cases, you need to talk with your lawyer about getting an agreement in place and making sure that the agreement is sufficient enough where you are comfortable that you may not have to disclose that. Because if the money's not going to the DDA, it doesn't have to go on the ballot language. So keep that in mind. The other thing too is if your library, let's just say it's in the DDA district, talk to the DDA about what you can do as far as, maybe some of the money starts to come, in areas that would benefit the library, so you can tell your voters, yes, it's going to the DDA, but this is what the DDA is doing in our area to help us or to help communities. So it's an education factor. I think this factor for the Friends and the amount of money factor for the Friends are two things that you can really be as assistants on in educating yourselves, helping educate the library board, and helping get that message out to the voters. This is a strategic issue about whether you have to have 1 or 2 questions on a library ballot. This is the law. Okay, basically you have to have, you can ask a single question if you're requesting both a renewal and a new millage. If the additional new millage is one question, if it's not greater than 0.5 mils. So anything 0.5 mils and below, you can ask it in one question. If you're going to go over 0.5 mils, the renewal and the new millage have to be in 2 questions. So we've actually had libraries that have determined how much new millage to ask for to keep it under that threshold so they don't have to go and ask it in 2 questions. Because a lot of times, this is one trend I've seen lately where communities get nervous. They want to make sure there's funding still in place, so they ask for the renewal, and they purposely ask for the new millage in a different question, even if it's not, the amount is not at issue. Oftentimes that new millage will fail and the renewal will pass. So this is one of those things you got to really be careful of. Make sure, one, you can ask for it in one question, whether it's the numbers are right. And then if you can ask for it in one question, think about the strategic aspect of this, whether you do want to have it in one question or not. But again, the threshold is a taxing unit shall not submit a single question if the new additional millage is greater than 0.5 mils. Okay, so keep that threshold in mind. Again, I gave you an example here. If it's 0.5, if you have a previously voted 1.5 mils for 20 years, and the renewal would be 0.97, The new additional mills, as you can see, is .53. That exceeds the .5 mils, so you'd have to ask for that in one question. So oftentimes in situations like this, the library won't ask for the total, they won't ask for the full amount back, they'll only ask for like .4 or something, so it gets under this threshold so for it in one question. Again, that's one of those strategic issues that the library board needs to discuss. Again, this is an example of when you can ask for in one question. It's a 1 mil that's been reduced to .9 mils. They can renew the .9 mils and ask for the .1 additional new millage in one question. As a matter of procedure, the library must adopt a resolution to place the ballot question on the election. And only 2 millage elections could take place within 1 calendar year. Be really careful about this if you are a city or township library, because if the township has placed a ballot proposal on the February and the August election, make sure that you're not going to be precluded from, make sure they haven't done more than 2 elections so that you can put it on in November. Typically this hasn't been an issue, but I can see where it would be an issue. Also, talk to your lawyer about procedure if you're a township library. The strange things about township libraries and city libraries are that you are asking for it, you have the authority or especially with a renewal, to ask to put that on the ballot, you as the library board. The odd part about it is that if you look at the ballot for a PA 164 library, it'll say, shall the township of X or shall the city of X levy the millage? Because the library board itself is not a taxing entity. The township, the city, the village is the taxing entity, okay? So the way we used to do it was we would have the library board pass a resolution and have the city, township, village council kind of rubber stamp that resolution so that the county would be very comfortable that the library board and the village were both on board with that. We have run into situations now where the library board passes a resolution to put a ballot proposal on, and the city either objects or takes no action on it. And then what happens? And at least one county in the state, they've taken the position that the library board itself can go directly to the county with that proposal and doesn't have to go through the city or township. So this is one of those issues, timing-wise, if you're a PA 164 library, make sure you've got all your procedural ducks in a row, because you don't want to be up against that deadline for the ballot proposal and realize that your county clerk might give you a problem if you don't go through the township, city, et cetera, to get their approval. So in a long-term planning, this is going to become very important for PA 164 libraries. Not so much with districts, because like I said before in the opening, you have your authority to put it on directly and don't need any other sort of rubber stamping for that. Again, 70 days before the election, we used to spend a lot of time with clients counting. I used to count and double count and all that, making sure the election calendar was correct. The state of Michigan now puts out an election calendar. They put it out well in advance. Everyone should be aware of the deadlines. Every once in a while, I get a county that has a different deadline. And typically, we just meet the earlier of the 2 deadlines. But again, this is one of those areas, like whether you can place the ballot proposal on the particular tax bill. It's always good to double check with the county clerk or the township clerk or whoever to make sure that everybody's on the same page with when that ballot is due. You don't want to be one day past their deadline and then have an argument about it. So make sure that's resolved ahead of time. For district libraries, it's kind of an odd thing. When they redid the election laws, they if a library had a school district in it, they had to go through the school district election coordinator. If they don't have a school district, they go through the county clerk. Well, most of the school district election coordinators have given all their duties to the county clerk. So sometimes it's just a matter of, sending a copy to the school district election coordinator. But this is one of those things you should talk to your lawyer about, who gets the resolution after it's passed by the board. Make sure you dot all the I's and cross all the T's, even if it's a formality. It doesn't hurt to send that to the county election coordinator, even if they've delegated all their duties, because then you've met the statutory obligation. This is in the District Library Establishment Act. It's not in the general election law, so a lot of times the clerks they won't know this provision in there, so make sure that you remember that. The 4 election dates, February, May, August, and November. Used to be, I don't know if you guys remember, about 15 years ago, you could have all these special elections. You had to go through a special, I can't remember what they call it, like a special election committee within the county, and now they're really limited to 4 dates. Just so you know, there's been some legislation proposed that would eliminate the ability to put local proposals on all but the November election. I think they've backed up a little bit, and now we're considering the August election. I don't know where that's going, if that's end up going anywhere, but that's one thing to keep in mind for future elections. That could be very problematic for a lot of municipalities. The point of it is, I guess the policy is that if you've got a local proposal, everybody has to go in November so all the voters know when it's on. I guess my personal thought is there's only 4 election dates a year. They're the same election dates every year. Voters should be aware of those election dates. It's, it's not, and they're talking about going on in August or November. Well, that, to me, they've already limited it quite a bit. So anyway, personal opinion, but that's a proposed bill that's pending. This is where I think the boards and the Friends of the Library probably have the most interest. And this is one of those areas that in a seminar it's very hard to discuss, because you really have to almost look at the particular way that someone has worded something to know whether it violates the Campaign Finance Act or not. As a general rule, municipalities can only spend money disseminating factual information. As a rule of thumb, the ballot proposal is always good, okay? Things that can be supported by statistics are typically good, depending on the way you phrase them. But you have to be careful of, if you're going to do this, the Campaign Finance Act only applies to municipal expenditures. So if a ballot question committee or other group comes, there's different rules that apply to them. So right now I'm just talking to the library board members here about what you can do with your money. The vote, to tell voters to vote yes, to put vote yes yard signs out, cannot be done by the library. That can only be done by a ballot question committee. Be very careful of that. Be very careful about fact versus opinion, and the way you use statistics that could take something that's a fact and turn it into something that's opinion. And I give an example because, and it's kind of awkward as an attorney to look at these materials sometimes, because I see where the intent is, and I see where you feel this way about your library. But kind of a good example is we have the best library staff in the county. Okay? I don't want to tell you that's not a fact, because I don't want to insult you by telling you your library staff isn't the best in the county, but really that's an opinion. It's not something that's backed by statistics. Now, if you say that your staff won the best staff MLA award for 2014, that's something that's more of a fact, right? So there's ways that you can kind of portray the information, but if you're a municipality, before you print that brochure out, before you send that flyer out, before you send a newsletter out, I recommend that you have your attorney look it over. You may not, it's not going to be a promotional piece. It can't be a promotional piece. That's the job of the ballot question committee. The other thing to keep in mind is you have to keep treat those who are campaigning for the millage as the same as those who are campaigning against the millage for the purpose of your policies, okay? If you allow the Vote Yes group to meet in your meeting room once a week, you have to allow the Vote No group to meet in the meeting room once a week. If you allow petitioners outside your library for the Vote Yes, allow the petitioners for the Vote No. Do not give out your patron list to anybody that is not affiliated with the library. Do not give your your patron list to the Friends group so they can send the material out, because that's a violation of the Library Privacy Act. Be very careful, and I caution clients a lot. There's a tendency to want to work with the ballot question committee, because the ballot question committee is the one that's promoting the millage for you. But that's where you get yourself into trouble sometimes as a library board. You have to make sure that, this is sort of clinical, and it's a lawyer talking, so you can see where if the ballot question committee wants something from the library that's perfectly acceptable, I typically recommend that they send a Freedom of Information Act request in for that information if you would require a Freedom of Information Act request from anybody else. So make sure that you have the proof that you've treated the ballot question committee the same for both sides. Desires to spend over $500 promoting the campaign, a ballot question committee should be formed. It should be independent from the library. I say often the Friends of the Library can assist in forming the ballot question committee. The ballot question committee and the Friends of the Library are two separate groups, okay? Even if a lot of the same people are involved. Be very careful of this if you're a Friends group, because what you risk if you spend too much of your money promoting the campaign is that you're going to lose your 501c3 status, or you're going to lose your nonprofit status, because there's a line between when you become a 501c3 nonprofit and when you become, a lobbying group, and it can be easy to get to that line. Okay, ballot question committees, they're easy to form. You still file a paper with the county, right? You have a very good treasurer, because they're easy to form, but they're hard to maintain. You have to keep very careful tracks. The state of Michigan has a tremendous amount of information on its website about ballot question committees, how to form them, very user-friendly, deadlines, what's expected of the treasurer. Seek out that information. Call the Bureau of Elections. Before you agree to be a treasurer, before you agree to form a ballot question committee, make sure that you know all the rules associated with that. Because again, one of the things I tell libraries and I tell Friends groups is, it used to not be this way. I mean, libraries were, of course everyone wants the library to be funded. They had no opposition. People were, whatever you need to do to form the library. I mean, the climate has changed with the economy and everything. There's groups that, they might not be against the library, but they don't want any new taxes. So there's a lot of now general opposition to new taxes. There could be specific opposition to your library tax. And what is a thing that you don't want? You want to be able to argue with them on the merits. We need it for this. If you may not agree, but what you don't want is allegations of Open Meetings Act violations, Freedom of Information Act violations, and campaign finance violations. Because what that portrays to the public, because it always gets out, so-and-so charged library with campaign finance violations. It's not reported later that the allegations were found to be without merit or whatever, but it casts a shadow on the campaign, and it causes people to think subconsciously or otherwise that the library is doing something wrong or sneaky or trying to pull a fast one in order to get the millage passed. So again, be very careful if you're on the library board not to spend public money unless it's in compliance with the Library Campaign Finance Act. Library board members have a little bit more leeway as policymakers for the library. Typically, you can do things like op-ed for the paper and do other things. It is not, my recommendation is a quick call to your lawyer to ask, whether, can we file this op-ed? Is that going to violate Michigan Campaign Finance Act? It's a little bit of insurance to prevent you from having headaches later. If you are a Friends group, make sure you're not spending in a way that's going to jeopardize your 501c3. Make sure that if you're going to participate in the campaign and you're going to spend over $500, that you form a ballot question committee, and make sure that you understand the rules and obligations of that ballot question committee before you get into it too far. Because I think the Friends groups have been such a good use of their grassroots. They're people who are already dedicated to the library, dedicated to the sustainability of the library and the funding. It's a good group to turn to. But again, the library it's not going to do any good if the Friends of the Library get themselves into trouble over a millage campaign. So again, make sure that your ducks are in a row before you start this and with the long-term planning. The one thing I will say about libraries is that libraries typically are planners. So I will get a call from a client a year before an election. We're thinking about going for an election in November. This will be like, August 12th. And I'm like, you've got 2 days. Oh, no, not this November, next November. So, libraries are planners, so it gives the Friends groups and other groups a lot of time to really think about what they're doing and to plan for those millage campaigns, which is a good thing. Well, that was a lot on millages. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any cards.
When you talk about the ballot question committee, is there another name for
The question is, when you talk about a ballot question committee, is there another name for that? There are other types of similar, like a PAC, have you heard, like, those types of things. The ballot question committee is the official name of what would be set up to promote or, for or against a millage. So that is the term, yes.
Can a library staff member serve on the ballot questioning committee as a private citizen?
That's a very good question, okay, and I'm glad you brought it up. The question is, can a library employee serve on the ballot question committee? One of the issues that you have, and I mentioned before that you can't spend public funds in support of a ballot initiative without it being in compliance with the Campaign Finance Act. We're not talking just millage dollars or dollars that come from the general fund. We're also talking about time. Okay, so if a staff member spends staff time doing stuff for a ballot question committee, that's going to be a violation of the Campaign Finance Act. But if a staff member in his or her own personal capacity outside of work hours works for the ballot question committees, there's no prohibition of that. My general conservative recommendation is that, and I hate to take away the independent, nature of the library board itself, but it gets so tricky when the library board members want to be on the ballot question committee. I think that's just not generally a good idea. If you are an employee, make sure that when you're working for them, it's very clear that you're not on the clock, okay? So that you're not, if you're an hourly worker, that you're not working during the hours that you claim, to be working at the library, or that you're going to put in to be working at the library. With salaried employees, it's a little bit more difficult. One of the things that you have to be careful, make sure you're not scheduled when you're working on that. If there's any question whether you're working for the library or working for the ballot question committee at the same time, don't do it then. It may limit directors to doing stuff, at 10 o'clock at night or what have you. Don't use your work email to send stuff out. Don't use the library. And I talked to you a little bit about, with respect to ballot, the meeting room policy. Don't let the vote yes people use the library's copying machine. If you wouldn't let anybody else use it for free, don't let the ballot question. So think about those things that are not, it's kind of understood, well, you don't give the ballot question committee a donation of $500, but sort of the in-kind, staff time, privileges, use of, don't let them use any postage meter that has a reduced postal rate for the library. I mean, all those things will be viewed as giving money away to the ballot question committee. So yeah, that's a very good question. Can a county library opt out of a DDA if the county government itself has decided not to opt out? That's one question I may have to look at. Whoever asked me that can come talk to me after that. Can a ballot question committee use a library email address for funding request? I would not do that. The ballot question committee, and I don't know all the ins and outs of the rules of that, but typically they have their own. There's an address that's on the ballot question committee. There's an own contact list. You kind of want to have, I think, an email address that would be like, vote for Library X or whatever. I would not use. I would stay very clear of anything to do with the library. If there's a question in your mind whether you should be doing it or not, don't do it unless you've had specific, authorization from your lawyer or whatever to use that, because that's going to impact not only you as a ballot question committee, it's also going to impact the library you're working to help promote. Okay. Oh, any idea about probability of success for election at the February, May, August, or November? This is the $1 million question. And anybody who knows the answer to this, I would love to know, because the clients always ask me this. It's very hard to tell. And oftentimes it has to do with what else is on the ballot more than what election it is. And I will tell you, the first district library that I ever helped form, I was so excited. It was a huge library, largest school district library in the state at the time. And they got all the paperwork in. They were coming up for their big first election, and it failed. Why? The school had a very unpopular election. All the businesses in the business district of the community had vote no posters in their front windows. And people didn't know what they were voting no on, so they just voted no on everything. And they asked for, they did a, kind of a postmortem on the election, and that's what people said. They saw all this vote no. They didn't know it was a school, they didn't know it was the library. So a lot of times it depends on, what's being promoted at the election. The less popular elections, the off-year elections or the February and May elections, oftentimes you get the voters out that really are interested in the subject. So that used to be the school of thought before, was that you're going to get people who want library service, so they're going to be out voting for this. But now, some of these anti-tax groups are very well funded and managed, and sometimes those tax groups now come out in droves. So I don't have a magical answer other than try to figure out what else is going to be on the ballot. But again, we had a newly formed PA 164 library. We put our library ballot proposal on a November election at a city. The city then came out and put 4 other proposals on at the same election. And so sometimes you just can't, and I don't know if you guys heard about Troy. Troy had 4 competing ballot proposals on the same proposal. So it's not always an exact science. Look at the history of what maybe your community is doing and figure out what else is going to be on the ballot. Because if there's something really unpopular, you might not want to be with them. You might want to be the step away from that issue. So that's one thing to consider. And again, if anyone is some sort of statistician that's looked at all this and can give me this information, I would be very grateful. So the one thing you may want to do, though, libraries, I know, and this is something that just occurred to me, that the Library of Michigan's been collecting that information over the past several years about what proposals have passed and when, and you might be able to glean some information off of that. I think they'd be very helpful for that. Well, if there's no more questions, I'm going to stay after in order to answer questions on either one of these topics, or anything else for that matter that you may be interested in. But I'm going to move on to the Open Meetings Act right now. Let's see. So this is where my technology is. Let's see if I can do this. All right. This is kind of a wildly different topic, but it's one. I used to do a sort of a tutorial on the Open Meetings Act, and I've shifted into this format because I think you kind of keep seeing the same mistakes over and over again that clients are making. And I will say that mistakes are made all the time with the Open Meetings Act, partly because you are dealing typically with a group of volunteers that are on a library board or on a committee, who have other jobs and other things going on, and you don't maybe have the access to all the training that staff and other people may have. So oftentimes it's volunteers trying to do the best that they can under the circumstances, and so mistakes are made. The purpose of this presentation is to kind of point out where I see a lot of issues arising, litigation issues arising, cases that are have AG opinions attached to them, or court cases, and things that we get a lot of questions about. I kind of see the same questions over and over again. So it's not a top to bottom OMA discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but it really covers, I think, the most important parts of the OMA, and where I see library boards especially being, and other municipal boards getting themselves into some questionable circumstances. I actually was going to it's my first common mistake, I was going to take it off until the library director sent me a news article last year, maybe, in the recent past, about a school board doing this. And so I decided not to take it off, and then since I decided not to take it off, I've had a lot of questions on it. So I figured it's one of those things that I may be not realizing that people are doing. Mistake number one is having a policy that limits the total time for public comment, okay? So for example, a policy that provides that the total time for public comment will only last a half an hour, okay? If you have a policy like that, I would change it. The reason is that under the Open Meetings Act, all persons in attendance at a public meeting have the right to address the public body. So if you limit the time to a half an hour, now you're probably, if I'm thinking of the average library board meeting, you're probably thinking, well, half an hour is not going to be a big deal because usually the same two people show up and, you know, they make their public comment, or I'm seeing nodding heads. The friends of the library are there and they're listening. Yes, typically library boards don't tend to be like a hotbed of political commentary all the time, like city council maybe or township board. But all it takes is one issue in your library. I had a library board that met in the basement of the library. Typically, they don't have a meeting room. They met in the basement of the library, and they had, typically a couple people at the meeting. And then something happened in the library. A patron got upset over pornography. Okay. The next thing we knew, we were meeting at the school auditorium with 300 people in attendance and 2.5 hours of public comment. So it's something that, you may say, okay, this isn't really going to happen, and I hope it doesn't, because it's usually a traumatic event that would cause something like this to happen. But again, make sure that you understand that everybody in that audience gets a chance to speak. There's ways you can restrict that in a lawful manner. And this is something for library boards that don't have a public comment policy. I would actually enact one, even if, because typically 99% of the time you're the one or two people comment type of libraries, you may find yourself in very short order in the 300-person comment situation. And you want to be sure that your ducks are in a row so it doesn't look like you're trying to trying to address this particular, try to curb people's speech about this particular topic. This can be the policy of the library on all topics. One way is time limit per speaker. So it says time limits up here, but per speaker. 3 to 5 minutes per speaker is reasonable. Okay? You can ask the speaker to give his or her name when they come up to speak. Okay? The reason for that is, I'm not from Traverse City. If I come to the Traverse City, the district library here, and I come to the meeting and I make a comment about the way they run the library, you may take my comment with a little more grain of salt than you would as somebody who's, a card holder and a patron who comes here all the time. So I think there's a valid policy reason that I think that you would have to ask people where they live and ask them their name. You can have other reasonable rules. But again, this is one of those policies I think you should have in place and review with your lawyer before you adopt the policy. Because, again, it may not be an issue, but one day it could all of a sudden, and it's going to be stressful, and there's going to be 100 other things you're thinking about, and you're not going to want to think about this. You can enforce that time limit. One thing that I don't recommend, when you have a policy is telling people what they can and cannot talk about. And this comes up a lot when you have a large group of people that have the same issue. Okay? Don't stop someone's comment and say, well, the speaker before you already said that they didn't like pornography in the library, so we don't need to hear that you don't like pornography in the library. My recommendation is, if they get up and recite the phone book, let them get up and recite the phone book for 3 minutes. It's their floor. The other thing to do, and it's really hard to do, especially if you're not in a library that has a lot of controversy maybe, or is not to engage in a back and forth with each commentator. Get yourself in the habit of that. Public comment is that. It's public comment. People get up, they make their comment. Whether you choose it in the later part of a meeting to address their comment and discuss it as a matter of board business, that's your discretion. But if people get used to the give and take, they can get up and they're going to, basically modify your agenda by getting up and making a comment that you're going to get into a give and take with them every time about. Then again, it's one of those things. You may be a small library. It may not be a big deal. It may take an extra 5 minutes of a meeting. But again, you're going to have a situation at some point maybe that will require you to have more of a control over the comment period. Mistake number 2, making people who attend the meeting turn off the video camera, turn off a tape recorder. I mean, this is one of those things that it can be very intimidating when you're at a meeting and you're on the board. And I've been at meetings as the lawyer, and someone's got a video camera, and they're videotaping everything you say. The Open Meetings Act specifically provides that they can do that. So again, it would be a mistake. And I want to point this out here too, because I think this is a really interesting provision in the Open Meetings Act. And the first bullet point is right out of the Open Meetings Act. The right to attend a meeting includes the right to tape, record, videotape, and broadcast the public proceedings, video, live, radio, and television. This is a 1976 statute, and it's still living in 1976. And we're going to get to that a little bit as far as email and other type of Skype and other type of technology. But keep in mind, now it's even more prevalent because, you know, in 1976, I think the methods of recording and so forth were a little bit different. What was happening a lot, not maybe with library boards, but with township cities that had zoning disputes, the developer would hire a court reporter. So every meeting there'd be a court reporter taking down every word. Those are the types of things that, you know, make sure that you keep that rule in mind when you're at the meeting. Now, there's no right for them to sit there and stick the microphone in your face or stick a video camera in the middle of the room so that other people can't see the board members. I mean, you can make, again, reasonable rules. You can have them set the video recorder off to the side, but again, they have the right to tape that. This comes up a lot with libraries, because libraries have a Library Privacy Act, and you have a lot of policies that say you cannot take pictures or videotape in the library. And the reason you have those policies is to protect news cameras and other groups from coming in and taping patrons while they're, you know, reading or what have you. Make sure if you have that policy that you exclude public meetings from that policy provision, because you don't want to have a policy in place that says they can't videotape at a meeting. This is the grayest area of Open Meetings Act law, and that's the committee structure. Many libraries have standing committees, they have special committees, and the kind of the common rule of thought that is a misunderstanding of the Open Meetings Act is, well, if we don't have a quorum of the board on the committee, then it's not required to be open to the public. That's not exactly true. If the committee is making decisions for the public body or narrowing down the options, that committee will be subject to the OMA. And I want to give you a couple examples of that, but I'd like to point out the actual definition of public body, because it says committee or subcommittee. I think there wasn't an intent ever for the legislature to exclude these types of committees from the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. Now, not every committee is subject to the Open Meetings Act. You have to specifically look at what they're doing. My remedy is not very satisfying. Probably consult with your attorney, but I'll give you an example. Let's take your library director just retired, okay? And you've developed a search committee, and that search committee is tasked to find a new library director. The search committee consists of less than a quorum of the board and a couple staff members. Now the question is, does that committee have to be subject to the Open Meetings Act? Likely, yes. That's right. It's reducing the number of candidates. If that's the task of the committee, and typically it is. Typically what the committee, otherwise the board would do it itself. So typically the committee is formed to assist the board in narrowing the scope of candidates. So if you receive 10 applications at the committee level, and you narrow those 10 applications down to 5, you're falling within the duties of a public body that should be subject to the Open Meetings Act. Now, if that committee is what they call a purely advisory committee, and I'm going to take the same set of facts and change them a little bit. If the committee is, looks at that same 10 applications, looks at all the applications, all the materials submitted by the applicants, and makes a recommendation to the board. And in that process, submits everything to the library board. Then it could be that that's a purely advisory committee, because you're not making any decisions. You're making an advisory recommendation, but they have all the same information you have. Now, flipping back to the first example, if you've narrowed it from 10 to 5, they don't see the 5. They don't see the resumes. They don't see that information. You've given them a recommendation on those 5. So that's where it can be a little bit different. Yeah.
Couldn't it be argued, though, that although all 10 applicants in that case have been given, it was a way to get around the Open Meetings Act, because it was known they weren't going to be looked at the other 5?
In the the question is,
In the second scenario?
well,
That if all the information gets passed on, but it's advised that you only look at these 5.
well, the question is if all the information is passed on, but they advise you to only look at the 5, as long as they have all the information, I would actually talk to your lawyer about whether, personally, there's no harm in opening it up to the Open Meetings Act. You know, the question I have is how important is it not to, you know, to do that. The problem when you open up the Open Meetings Act is not that you want to be, it's not that you want to be, you know, trying to get around the public. It typically is that you have to then do minutes and have public comment and do all of that. There's a lot of formalities with the Open Meetings Act that takes place once you decide that. But typically, subcommittees of libraries, like personnel committees, building committees, typically all those committees are doing things that, you know, they've been given tasks by the library board that are taking away decisions. So again, if you are following the Open Meetings Act, not to worry. I mean, that's the threshold. If you are not following the Open Meetings Act, those committees, I'd recommend getting your opinion of your attorney on whether that particular committee has to be subject to the Open Meetings Act or not. Because purely advisory committees do not, but it's a very narrow construction.
Go back to the issue of a search for a new director, and you have 10 applicants, and 3 of them have wanted to have confidentiality because they don't want their home libraries to know
Okay.
they're applying elsewhere. And you're subject to the Open Meetings Act. How do you protect?
The question is, how do you protect confidentiality of a search committee? This is my opinion for everybody out there listening. You should talk to your own lawyer about this before you go into this. My recommendation is that you cannot guarantee confidentiality throughout the process, okay? There is a very limited Open Meetings Act exemption to consider applications if the person has requested confidentiality, okay? That is a very narrow exemption, and it does not allow you, in my opinion, to go into closed session to compare and contrast, okay? Typically, I give the example, it would be like, let's just say I get 10 resumes, and I've got certain criteria in my job application. They have to have 10 years of experience. They have to have this type of degree. I may go into closed session to consider whether that particular resume meets the standards of my job posting, but I can't use that exemption to say, okay, candidate A, I think candidate A is better than candidate B is better than candidate C. That's just a kind of the cruel reality of public life, is that you're kind of opening, you can do your best, but I would be very cautious about ever guaranteeing confidentiality. So work with your lawyer about what you can tell the applicants, what you're willing to do as far as the closed session. But eventually, I mean, municipalities have gotten sued over, the finalists of a large job like director and so forth. And it's very clear that the interviews have to be in the open. So I think they're going to understand that. I mean, I think it's fair enough to say if they don't meet the initial threshold, they shouldn't be exposed to the public if they're not even going to be seriously considered. But once they're in the mix, as far as serious consideration, there's I think, little you can do to protect them. I think they have to understand that, and I think it would not hurt if you've got a big director search is a big deal, things like that, to get the parameters of what you can and can't say, what you can do in closed session, what you can't do in closed session, and how you should structure that from an Open Meetings Act perspective. That will just protect you in the long run. Oh, okay. Discussing business with a quorum of the council or board. Oh, I want to go back to one point I wanted to make about committees, okay? If you have a quorum of the board that's on a committee, you're technically having two separate meetings. You're having a board meeting and you're having a committee meeting. So be very careful of that. And I want to make that distinction because it doesn't separate the two. So just be very conscious of that. Mistake number 4 is discussing with a quorum of council or board members outside of an open meeting. This is one of the things that it's interesting. I think technology has caused an increase in lawsuits over this. This used to be, 30 years ago, you'd see 3 members of your board sitting around having coffee at the local, coffee shop, and people would accuse you of talking about business outside the board. With the increased use of email, you see an increased use of accusations about this. This doesn't happen a lot in libraries. It happens more in townships and cities where a quorum of the board happen to be, have office hours together. So you have to be very careful that way. But still, I think email has created a problem with this. You may be by the book and still get sued over this. And the reason that you do that is because of the discussion that actually happens at a board meeting. Let's just say you've got a controversial policy that you're trying to enact. Maybe it's dealing with a sensitive subject like internet use, pornography, filtering, let's say something like that, where people are, coming out to the meetings, they're concerned about it. And oftentimes I've seen where boards are very like-minded. You might you may have 5 people on the board and all 5 people feel very strongly that you should have filters. So when you get to the meeting, the policy amendment that says we were going to start filtering comes up for discussion. Any discussion? Nope, no discussion. Vote, the policy's in. Okay? You may be very like-minded, and you may not have talked about it with people outside the meeting, but to the public, they're going to say, how did you come to that controversial, decision without any sort of discussion? You guys must have been talking about it behind closed doors. So the way to really deal with this, aside from not violating the Open Meetings Act, obviously, and talking about it behind closed doors, is to do a couple things. But I want to point out here the definition of a meeting is at which a quorum is present for the purpose of deliberating toward or rendering a decision on public policy. And this is the three-part definition. These are my numbers in here just for clarification. But again, if there are 2 of you who are discussing the policy, there's no problem. If there's a 5-member board, it's not a quorum. Here's the issue. I get a lot of people that say, well, we didn't decide anything. That's not the benchmark. It's deliberating towards is part of it. So the discussion itself outside of an Open Meetings Act is a problem. On public policy. So if you got a quorum of the board and you're deliberating on what sandwiches you should order for lunch, again, not a problem. It has to be a matter of public policy for the library board. I want to make sure I'm not good. Okay. It does not apply to a conference or informational gathering. Okay, so here, if you've got a quorum of the board here, you're not in violation of the Open Meetings Act unless you meet in the hall and start discussing your policies that need to be amended. Those are the types of things. But merely listening to a session, a lot of times a quorum of the board attends the MLA presentations or attends other conferences for educational purposes. You can listen to groups. You can invite people in and listen to their groups. What you can't do is then engage in a discussion or deliberation. Be very careful of this if you have a traveling library board, for example, that's going to meet with the city council to ask them if they would help you in establishing a district library. So if you have a quorum of the board present as an audience member, make sure that either that meeting is posted as a library board meeting or that a quorum of your board doesn't discuss. There's actually a case on this. It involved a planning commission and a township board. And in townships, one of the board members is also a planning commissioner. So you got one person in a dual role, and you had 2 township board members out of 5 in the audience. Okay, so you had 3 members of the township board present. And the supervisor and the planning commission / board member were having a huge discussion. So the charge was they're violating the Open Meetings Act because there was a quorum of the board present in the meeting. The court found that in that instance, they did not violate the Open Meetings Act because that 3rd member sat silently in the audience and just listened. But had that 3rd member piped up and said something, that's where you have a violation. So be very careful. There's very easy ways to trip yourself up on this particular issue. You cannot have a valid meeting over email. And the main reason is there's no opportunity. If you remember before, you have every person who has a meeting has the right to be heard at that meeting. There's no opportunity for public comment. I've had a lot of questions about Skype and other things where people can kind of join in, like a go-to-meetings. But if there's no really meaningful way of the public to participate, it's not going to be a lawful meeting. Telephone conferences, this is one of those areas that, again, I would talk to your particular attorney, but there is general rules right now that would allow you in certain circumstances to have telephone conferences. They typically require that a quorum of the board be present at a central location, and maybe 1 member calls in. It's not a general telephone, like a go-to-meeting technology where you can have a conference call where people are conferencing in from different, that's still not permissible. But if you have a situation where there's a quorum of the board present at a central location that's open to the public, if 1 person calls in, I would talk to your lawyer because there's some nuances in the case that you might want to be aware of. But again, I don't, that's generally acceptable practice, same with video conferencing. The worst part about email to me is when I get a FOIA request for any and all email involving a particular issue. And in that email, or in those email chains, I see a quorum of my board discussing something. So there you have a violation of the Open Meetings Act that's now in writing, subject to FOIA. It's a really difficult position to be in as a library board, so be really careful when you use email. There's a lot of implications of email for FOIA, but it has a dual problem for the Open Meetings Act. It's such a great way to communicate, but it just can get you tripped up. Plus a little caveat, having looked at thousands of emails over the last year, be very careful what you say in an email. Don't say anything in an email that you would not say in a written letter. Have your own, and this is just a little aside, but have your own email address for your official board business. Don't mix it up with your personal computer, because you're going to get a FOIA request someday for any and all email on a subject. You're going to have to go through your own personal computer to find what's your official business versus your personal business. So again, I just want to be very careful to keep that in mind when you're communicating. There's lots of implications for Open Meetings Act and for the Freedom of Information Act. And this is the Open Meetings Act. Like I said, I call it the reply to all problem. If you're sending something out, let's say you're the director and you're sending emails out, or if you're the board president and you're sending emails out, do not copy all the board members on that directly, either in the to or in the CC. If you're going to send them out, blind copy, and that's the remedy, blind copy your board members, because you can't reply to all then. If they're blind copy, you actually are going to have someone, because what happens is someone will send an email out. Let's just say you send an agenda out, and you send it out to everybody. Well, you can easily put reply to all. I don't like agenda item on 5 on this agenda. I don't think we should be doing this. And then you're going to get someone jumping in. Yes, I think we should be doing this. As soon as you get that quorum jumping in, now you've got a problem. If you do the blind copy, someone's going to have to make an effort to either go into their inbox and get that email list of all the board members. They're going to have to think about it. It's not going to be just the reply to all before they actually do it. Also, having an email distribution policy helps you with this problem from an Open Meetings Act, from a FOIA perspective, and make sure that all your essential correspondence is kept, especially if you do a lot of stuff from home. Board members do a lot of stuff from home. make sure that you copy the right people on the emails that have to be kept in the right places as part of your library record. Not allowing the 18 hours notice or posting a notice with the incorrect information. This is so important to make sure that your email, your special meetings are properly posted, because this is where people get you all the time. And the problem with the Open Meetings Act, the way it works, is there's several different remedies involved, but one of the remedies that is involved it's not an automatic, if you have a decision made at a meeting that's in violation of the Open Meetings Act, it's not automatically void, that decision, but there's a big balancing test of whether it impairs the public's understanding. There's a test involved, so don't put yourself in that position where you have a particular violation of the Open Meetings Act. Oftentimes you can hold the meeting again. You have a special meeting to discuss something, it's not posted notice, you can post it, have 18 hours notice, hold the meeting again. Where you have to be really careful. Let's just say that you have spent months doing your ballot proposal, and the deadline is August 15th for the November election, and you've sent a special meeting for August 14th or August 15th. Make sure that notice is correct, because there's no do-over then. Then you're going to have yourself in a situation where you're adopting a resolution at a meeting that may be in violation of the Open Meetings Act. There are relatively new requirements for special meeting notices, and it involves electronic notices on your website. Are all of you pretty much aware of that there's the new special meeting notices that went out? Typically the director, the people that put the notices on are well educated of that. But if the public body directly or indirectly maintains an official internet presence that includes monthly or more frequent updates of public meetings, agendas, and minutes, you have to put the notice on either on the front page of your website or in a conspicuous link. And that link better be like really conspicuous, like, hey, special meeting notices here, and not, not buried in like a calendar or other types of things. Make sure that there's no question about where that link will take you. I want to get into closed sessions. I put this as the most common mistake. There's a lot of mistakes that happen with closed sessions. There's exemptions, there's things that happen. I put this because this is the one that I see most often as it relates to your employees. There are exemptions in the Open Meetings Act that allows you to discuss employment issues, okay? And employment issues tend to be among the most sensitive, aside from patron issues, amongst the most sensitive at libraries. So I want to make sure that you understand the rules and you're doing it correctly so that you don't get yourself in a situation where you're trying to do the right thing by your employees, trying to maintain their privacy, but then all of a sudden find yourself in an Open Meetings Act lawsuit. So one of the mistakes too is believing that this is sort of an all-encompassing. I've seen minutes, and not just libraries, other municipalities, they'll say, I moved in closed session to discuss a personnel issue. That may or may not be appropriate, depending on what the personnel issue is. You cannot go into closed session to discuss a director's contract, for example. And the reason is that there's several exemptions in the Open Meetings Act that are related to employment issues. One we talked about a little bit earlier, and that's that application exemption, which I said is very narrow to consider certain applications. The other is to consider the dismissal, suspension, discipline, complaints, charges, or periodic personnel evaluations of a public officer or employee. That's not an all-encompassing employment. It doesn't say you can go into closed session to discuss whether you're going to cut benefits to your employees, for example. You have to limit it to these particular things if the name and person requests the closed hearing. Be very careful about following the strict requirements of the statute. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that, and this is, I want to go back to one issue, but this is the common mistake, is not receiving the permission from the employee, okay? Now I have talked to the employee and said, hey, we're going to discuss your evaluation at the board meeting. But make sure you have specific permission for you to go into closed session to do that. That is evident from the record of the meeting. In municipal law, a public body speaks through its minutes. So anything that happens really kind of outside the minutes is going to be subject to question. So for example, if you've got your director evaluation and she or he is not going to be at the meeting, have them sign a piece of paper that says, I, agree to the closed session. Your lawyer can help you put the words together to make sure it meets with the statutory requirements. Make sure you have that in writing, and make sure that it is placed into the record of the meeting that you've received it. Likewise, if the person is present at the meeting, ask the person at the meeting, you agree to go into the closed session to discuss this, and have them verbally state back, like a deposition, like have them state back for the record, yes. I thought this was, it's in the statute, and it's one of those things that you don't really think about because, typically they have permission, it's not an issue. There's been litigation over it recently, where a board member, for example, is present at the meeting, and it's pretty obvious that they agreed to go into closed session, but it was never in writing. You want to make sure that you don't get yourself in the position to get sued over that. It's a very simple response is to make sure it's on the record that that person asked for the closed session. Partly because when you go into closed session to discuss an employment-related issue, you have to keep in mind that that employee is not required to be in the closed session. And that person can revoke their approval at any point. So sometimes the board wants to go in to talk about an employee and doesn't want the employee there. And that's the right of the board. But then that employee may say, if you're not going to invite me into closed session to discuss my complaint or discuss my personnel evaluation, then I want you to discuss it in open session. And in that event, you either don't discuss it at all, or you have to talk about it in open. You may not continue to talk about it in closed session. Yes, we have a question.
These rules apply to Friends boards as well?
The question is whether the rules apply to Friends boards. The Open Meetings Act only applies to public bodies and meets the definition of public bodies. Friends boards typically, I've never seen a Friends board that met that definition. There is some case law about some really unusual circumstances when nonprofits, because the definition of public body has to do with how it's funded. So, that's one of those things. I've never seen a Friends group that's subject to the Open Meetings Act. But, if you have a question about it, I would talk to your attorney, but I haven't seen it yet.
Now, you said they requested or they acknowledged or given permission to with the closed meeting personnel.
Yeah.
Do they have to request it goes in, or do they just have to, okay, we go to closed session?
Well, they have to give permission. Typically what happens is in a practical perspective, typically a board will approach the employee and say, do you want to discuss this in closed session? And then they can say yes or no. Or they'll say, or the employee will approach the board and say, I prefer if you don't talk about this in open session, I'd like to go into closed session. So it kind of practically happens that way in most cases.
Do they have to honor the request?
They don't. You don't have to go into closed session. The board on any closed session, the board has the authority to go into closed session or not go into closed session. So if they request to go into closed session, the board doesn't have to go into closed session. If they don't request a closed session or don't agree to a closed session, they can't go into closed session. Because it's an employment-related issue, if you have a situation where an employee has requested that you go into closed session to talk about it, and you don't want to do that, I would talk to your lawyer, because employment-related issues tend to have lawsuits. And you got to be very careful about that issue and what you disclose about that issue. So again, it's one of those practical perspectives that if the employee has requested a closed session and you don't want to go into closed session, you need to talk about that with your lawyer, I think, in advance. Okay, this is I'd sort of like to know the theory behind this back when this was done in '96, but there's actually two separate procedural requirements for going into closed session. And this is where a mistake happens a lot if you haven't counted the numbers correctly. And the mistake is not having the proper number of votes for a closed session. For certain exemptions, you can only go into closed session if there are 2/3 of the members appointed and serving. Okay? So with the 6-member board, 4 members must approve the closed session. If only 4 board members are present at the meeting and 3 approve the closed session is not proper. So you can see you can actually have a meeting with a quorum and be able to conduct a lot of business, but you can't go into closed session. And one of those is to discuss attorney-client privilege communications. I remember about 10 years ago, I traveled all the way up to a meeting to discuss a closed attorney-client privilege letter in closed session. It's perfectly acceptable in the Open Meetings Act. It has to have 2/3 roll call vote and it's a roll call vote too, by the way, of the appointed members, and one person didn't show. So I got in my car and I drove all the way back home because they couldn't discuss what they wanted to in the open session. It was attorney-client privilege. So again, if you've got something that you want to discuss in closed session that has a 2/3, make sure you have a head count before you go into have the closed session. Certainly, if you don't have a number, but the closed session may be called. Again, there's 2 separate procedural requirements. One is just by a majority vote, like other votes of the board, and that's for the one we just talked about. It's sort of the employment-related ones, the dismissal, suspension, discipline, and the periodic personnel evaluations, and for strategy negotiation sessions connected with the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement. But the 2/3 roll call vote comes in with the other ones to consider the purchase or lease of real property, to consult with municipal attorney regarding the trial and settlement strategy of pending litigation, to review, this is the content one, to review the specific contents of an application for employment or appointment if the candidate requests that the application remain confidential, and to consider material exempt from discussion or disclosure by state and federal statute. I want to stop for a minute and talk about the last bullet point. The most common use of this exemption is to discuss attorney-client privilege communications. Attorney-client privilege communications in writing are exempt from disclosure under the Michigan Freedom of Information Act. Therefore, you can discuss them in closed session here. So make sure that you're discussing something that's exempt from statute. I think another common exemption for libraries as opposed to other public entities is the Library Privacy Act. So if you are, and the way this comes in front of the board is if you've limited the privileges of a patron, or if you've kicked them out of the library, terminated their rights for a certain amount of period, and they appeal, that appeal comes to the library board. So now you got a situation where you've got someone who's appealed their right of access to the library, and you as the library board can't reveal any information in the library record or be in violation of the Library Privacy Act. So how do you do that? You discuss that information in closed session. I want to stop for a minute and be very careful about this. If those patron appeals don't happen that often. Again, another area that would be good to consult with your lawyer. Typically, lawyers are involved when it gets to the appellate level with the board. But be very careful about what you say in the open meeting, because you have kind of an interesting balancing act here, because as a public entity, you have obligations under the Open Meetings Act to be, to let people know what you're discussing and make sure it's lawful. But you also have an obligation not to reveal confidential library records to the public. And one particular case we were involved with where the library board, the library director suspended privileges for a set period of time. The person appealed, and the library board upheld the decision of the library director. So a lawsuit was filed, and one of the counts of the complaint was defamation, that the library had defamed this particular individual by discussing the fact that this person's privileges had been revoked in line. If I was at the meeting where it happened. His name was never used. There was no way from the library's perspective that he actually went to the paper and complained, and that's how it became public. But it's very clear from the library record that his name was never used. So you have to be very careful about that. Again, with libraries, and I think with these type of patron issues, they don't happen that often, and sometimes when they do, it can be very stressful, especially if the patron was suspended for things that may affect the safety or security of staff and patrons. I mean, the staff may be very on edge about this particular individual anyway, and especially if they're litigious. So it doesn't hurt in those circumstances to be very careful and to consult with your lawyer about how you handle those situations at the open meeting, and what you can and can't talk about in closed session related to those. And then, you know, there's a balancing act, and under the Open Meetings Act, you have to give enough information to the public to let them know what the decision was. And there's a case that was recently, you know, in litigation's the same way. You know, you want to make sure that you protect the litigation perspective of the client, but you also want to give the public the right to know what's going on, especially if it involves public funds. And one community was sued and lost because what the motion was in public was they actually decided to settle the lawsuit. Because you can go in, and you saw the exemption, you can go into closed session to discuss material that's in pending litigation if your lawyer's there and affects the, you know, detrimentally affects the financial situation of the community. But when they went out into open session, they were so cryptic about what happened. They basically said they made a motion for the city attorney to, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but to sign documents necessary to effectuate the decision. Well, people didn't know what that was. It was very cryptic, and so the court felt there wasn't enough information in the record to decide that the public simply did not know that the lawsuit had been settled. So again, if you've got a situation with a patron or a specific situation with an employee, it doesn't typically happen that often where you have sort of these controversial type things, but it wouldn't hurt to have an attorney assistance in the going into closed session, and then in potentially crafting some potential motions that you would make coming out of the closed session to make sure that you meet the balancing test with Library Privacy Act, and then you also meet your obligations under the Open Meetings Act to be, you know, to give the public enough information so that they know. So again, keep that procedure every time you have a closed session. Roll call vote versus regular vote, never hurts to have a roll call vote. Some statutes require a roll call vote, so when in doubt, have a roll call vote. It takes usually a minute more. It's not that big a deal, but some of them require it, and this is one of them. Again, a common mistake is taking improper action in closed session. The public may not vote in closed session, and all votes have to be accounted for in the open meetings part of the session. So don't be in a situation where you're voting. I mean, there's cases that even suggest that coming to the consensus with a nodding of all, do you agree? And then the nodding, even the sort of nonverbal sort of agreement can be a problem. So be very careful when you're in closed session that you're not doing anything that would violate that part of the Open Meetings Act. So again, there's a sort of a conspiracy theory among some members of the public, and one of the things that you want to do is make sure that there's no claim that you're using a closed session to discuss things that you shouldn't be doing. So make sure that you are very clear in your motion about what you're doing and what your statutory reference is. And we often put, you know, we've been so far as like for example, the attorney-client privilege communication. Now I know, and I've read the cases, I know that it's a perfectly legitimate exemption to go into closed session and discuss attorney-client privilege communication. And I know it's a perfectly legitimate exemption to go into closed session and discuss a library record. But if you look at the Open Meetings Act, that's not in there. And so I've had members of the public stand up and say, I looked at the exemptions in the Open Meetings Act and it doesn't say anything about attorney-client privilege communication. So a lot of times to save yourself some problems or some accusations is that, you know, in your motion say, I'm going into closed session to discuss an attorney-client privilege communication that's exempt from disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. Information exempt from the disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act is exempt under the Open Meetings Act. You might even want to do that for a while so people understand, so you kind of educate the public as to what you're doing. Because again, I talked about this a little bit with Campaign Finance Act. sometimes when people are not happy with the decision made, the substantive decision, you're the elected or appointed board. They can't really do anything about that till the next election or appointment cycle. But what they can do is try to collaterally attack the decision by accusing you of violating the Open Meetings Act, that you're doing something secret, that you're trying to, pull the wool over our eyes, or try to invalidate the decision because of technical, deficiencies of the decision. So again, that's why it's really careful to, and sometimes you have to do a little bit of an education piece for the public. And make sure there is a specific statutory reference in your mind, and make sure that you're going into closed session to discuss something that's, and I talked a little bit about contracts, because I think contracts are the ones where it really doesn't seem logically like you should have to talk about negotiating an architect's contract. Because sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes the architect's in the audience, and you're discussing whether you think his abilities are worth this price or not. It's awkward, but there's simply no way to go into closed session to substantively discuss that. So make sure that you've got the statutory basis for that, and that you can explain that to the public. And make sure that the minutes reflect the proper action of the board. I've actually seen circumstances where the board has gone into closed session to discuss something totally lawful. The discussion was totally lawful. The only part was they bungled the way they made the motion. And a good example of this, going back and building on an earlier topic, is if you go into closed session to discuss a periodic personnel evaluation of the library director. Say we're going into closed session to discuss a periodic personnel evaluation of the library director, and the library director affirms that the validity of the closed session. If you just say, going into closed session to discuss a personnel issue, then you've got a problem. The closed session was correct. You didn't do anything wrong there, but the minutes don't reflect the action taken by the board. And again, building on another theme, the board speaks through its minutes. So if you want to go back and try to supplement those minutes after they've been approved, that may be a problem on your part too. So again, make sure the minutes are correct, make sure they accurately reflect what they do, make sure that you've got the statutory basis to do what you're doing with the Open Meetings Act. Again, this is my favorite. We moved into executive session. Executive session is not an Open Meetings Act term. It doesn't really have any meaning. It's called a closed session in the Open Meetings Act. And again, you're just going to raise red flags with the public, even if you're doing something that's totally legitimate. So use the correct terminology, use the correct statutory sites, and you're going to find that you're going to get a lot better reception from the public as well. Okay, do I have any Open Meetings Act? Yeah, Dave.
Would you please tell us the proper procedure for going into a closed session and coming back out of a closed session?
Well, going into a closed session would be a motion, and it would be, I'll give you an example. You'd say, someone would make a motion to go into closed session to discuss attorney-client privilege written communication. Then there'd be a second to that motion, and then there'd be a discussion. And then when you call for the vote, this is one of those, thank you, this is one of those votes that requires a 2/3 roll call vote. So you have to have 2/3 roll call vote to go into the closed session. Once you're in the closed session, this is where you stop the open session minutes, stop the open session recording. You have to have a separate set of minutes for closed session, okay? So once you're in the closed session, you have a separate set of, opening the closed session. The motion was made, opening the closed session, who's present at the closed session, who's absent, just like your regular meetings. And then the minutes of that meeting, of what happened in the closed session. Now, the minutes should not have any vote in the closed session, because you can't vote, but it'll say discussion of attorney-client privilege communication, for example. The Open Meetings Act is very, I think, lax or undefined in how you go out of closed session. Again, and it's one of those things like it's sort of a weird thing, because you can't make a motion in closed session, but how do you come out of closed session without a motion? So typically you just go back into the open, wherever you had the open session, or you make the motion to go back into open session, and that motion to go back into open session is on the Open Meetings Act records, and then anything that follows after that. Is there something I'm...
So you don't make a motion to close the closed session?
I don't know that that's very clear. I think you can do that, but there should be a transition, and the motion can be as simply as a motion to go back into open session, but typically you see that in the open part of the minute meeting. Because it's one of those things, because you're in closed session, you can't have a motion in closed session, but how do you get out of closed session without having the motion? Right? It's a chicken and the egg.
Just call it back to order.
Well, I think there should be some sort of vote at the open meetings. I think it would be hard, I think, I shouldn't say this on tape, because of course, but I think they'd be hard pressed to find a violation, because there's no real statutory procedure set forth in the Open Meetings Act for that. So as long as it's clear that, the closed session's been closed and the open session's been open. But I like to see that motion in the open session minutes.
The minutes of the closed session are not a public record.
Well, I'm going to say something, and I want to be really clear about that, okay? When you talk about FOIA and whether something's disclosable, there's a two-step process. One is whether it's a public record or not. And then the second step, if the answer to that is yes, the second step is it exempt from disclosure? Closed session minutes are public records, but they're exempt from disclosure by statute. Only a court order. So you can't say, oh, I think it'd be okay to give these out. They're not really that controversial. Only a court order can allow you to release those closed session minutes. Can public attendees be required to sign an attendance sheet? Very good question. The answer is no, okay? And I want to make a distinction between something I said earlier about the public comment and this question, which is a very good question. You can't have any impediments for the attendance at a meeting. I have a right to come in and attend any meeting I want without anybody asking me why I'm there or what I'm looking for, anything like that. You cannot require me to sign in as an attendance. You can't make any impediment to my attending a meeting. There was a news story about this a couple days ago did you guys see it, with the guy who was told he couldn't be at the meeting if he didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Those are the kinds of things. As a lawyer, I've sat in on meetings on behalf of clients where I don't really feel like telling them who I'm representing. And I don't think I should be required to do that. And the simple fact is that that's not a legal requirement. Now, I told you could ask them to do it as a condition of speaking. So if I want to come up then and speak in front of the public, it's reasonable that you ask me who I am and my address, for example, okay? But just in attendance, and I love this about library boards, and I love this about like smaller communities, is especially if they've got somebody new in the audience they haven't seen before. I would say at the table, and they'll be like, "Oh, hey, come on in. Well, we're the board. Who are you? Did you just?" It's the friendliness of it, which is a great community service. But as the lawyer, I'm like, don't ask them. We don't want to know. We don't care about you or why you're here. Don't answer that question. So, again, be very careful, especially if someone looks really uncomfortable when you ask that question, because I've seen that too. So again, you cannot require a condition of signing in or anything as attendance. Let them come in, just let them keep to themselves and have that be the requirement. Is a committee set up to write or revise library policies subject to the OMA? I would say yes, a policy committee, because if you're making decisions, because the whole point of the policy committee is that you're rewriting the policies for the library board, and you can present them with what your suggested policy is. Unless you show them every one of your drafts and all the, every one of your discussions, I would have that committee be open to the public. Then what's required is what's required of your library board meeting. Meetings, call to the public, minutes, proper notice are the big three. I think, unless I missed a question, that's the last of my questions. Does anybody else have a question? Here comes one. Thank you. Oh, okay, hang on. If a 3-member committee for renovations decides on buying blinds without having an open meeting notice, is that okay? Is there a threshold of importance cost? It doesn't sound like a hypothetical to me, but it's a great hypothetical if it is one. The answer is there's no threshold of importance or cost. It's whether you're deliberating towards or making a decision on public policy. And I think I would have a question of whether this 3-member committee, I think they've been delegated, I hope they've been delegated the authority to spend money, otherwise that should remain with the board, so they shouldn't probably be doing that anyway. But that's just my take on this very hypothetical. All right, anything else? Go ahead.
You made a statement earlier about how the board speaks through its minutes. We ran into a situation where there was a member who wasn't present at a previous meeting, did not like what was said, and made a very big deal about voting no or approving the minutes of that meeting. Maybe this is a rules of order question, but if you're not present in the meeting, should you vote on whether or not to accept minutes of that meeting?
Well, I think there's sort of two issues there. If you're present at a meeting, a subsequent meeting, you're entitled to vote on the minutes. The question is the propriety of the reason for voting on the minutes. I mean, the minutes are a reflection of what actually happened.
That was kind of our discussion with some of us who were in disagreement with. That person cannot vote on whether those minutes reflected the accuracy of what happened.
Yeah, the minutes, the question is about the accuracy of the minutes. The accuracy of the minute, we get this question a lot. What happened at the meeting happened. And if you're at the meeting and you have a disagreement about whether it happened or not, that's a proper discussion for approval of the minutes. What's not a proper discussion for the approval of the minutes is whether you agree with the decision when you weren't there. So I'm not really sure, what you can do about a board member who votes no. I mean, there's not much you could do about that except to maybe, make the record reflect the reasons for the vote no. But if the motion passes to approve the minutes, I think when, let's just say hypothetically, let's just say a couple members of your board decide that they are revisiting that decision or regret that decision, and they start to jump on board of that discussion, that's where I think you need to get your attorney involved and basically say, what happened at the meeting happened. If you're going to undo a decision, there's a Robert's Rules of Order process for revisiting decisions, but it's not through approval of the minutes. That's not a way to ratify or not a way to undo a decision made at a prior meeting. So I think if I were at that meeting, I would make sure the record reflected that, although you're a board member and you have the right to vote yes or no on a particular issue, that, you weren't at the meeting and it's a substantive rather than a did this or did this not happen at the meeting. Yes, go ahead.
Along that order, if you got a board of 7 people, and you got 4 new board members at that first meeting, those 4 new board members weren't present when the minutes were taken. The 3 aren't enough to vote on it to get the quorum.
Well, I think the question is whether you're the question is whether you've got 3 board members that are original to the board, 4 new board members, and they're approving minutes of what happened at the prior board meeting. My position is that they should get educated enough to make that decision, that it's not really a proper reason not to vote is because they weren't at the meeting. I mean, typically something like that. I've really never had that happen, so I don't know how common this is, but I would typically say that, you're laughing, okay, it's a hypothetical again. Hypothetically speaking, it's like any other decision where you're not at the board meeting. It's your job, or you weren't on the board at the time original decision was made. I think it's your job to get educated as to whether the meeting happened. And it's just, I think in a practical matter, they're going to have to rely on they're going to either watch the video of the meeting if it's available, or they're going to have to rely on the representations for the board members that were there. That's what happened. That would happen with any board member who wasn't at a meeting with approval of the minutes. I don't think, you have to keep in mind that you have a fiduciary obligation to vote unless you have a conflict of interest. And a conflict of interest, in a very general sense, I just want to be very careful, there's lots of nuances, typically involves whether you have a financial interest in the decision. Otherwise, it's actually a breach of duty not to vote when you're required to vote. So abstaining when there's no reason to abstain, I would just say that it's their obligation to get educated on that enough where they, if they're not comfortable, then vote no.
Would voting yes
Well, I think you're getting into, I think you're getting a little into like the hearts and minds of the board members. I think your question is a larger question that can apply to other different situations where you may not personally have been at a meeting, but you're called on to make a decision about something. Your job is to get educated enough, and if you are a board member and you feel like you rely on that, that's going to be a decision you make as an elected or appointed official, frankly. Just like anything else. We've had people that go back through the minutes. They're new board members. There's lots of stuff that's gone on before them that they have to get educated on, that they might ask the board member at the meeting, why'd you make this decision? What was the rationale behind it? And they're going to make it's like juries are called to, question the validity of witnesses all the time. You're going to have to make those decisions as a board member. I think it's very problematic to say, I'm not going to vote on the minutes because I wasn't there. I think if you carry that philosophy too far, you're going to get yourself into real trouble. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I am going to be here if you have extra questions that you didn't get answered, but I really appreciate your attendance and your thoughtful questions, and good night. Thank you.